Yo, what's going on, snipers? And it is finally time. My 1992-93 rosters are officially completed on Xbox Series S and X. By the time you guys see this video, they will be live, so go check them out. I'll probably put a screenshot up of what the file name is. It's probably similar to the last roster build anyways, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a rundown of what this roster looks like, as well as I wanted to show you guys how to set it up for franchise mode, because obviously there's a lot of little setup details. But I would still also kind of recommend you as well, just like my 1999-2000 build, to use the real NHL teams. But for the AHL, you could obviously sub in the AHL teams I made. I know it kind of sucks considering there's like Hartford, Quebec in this and stuff like that. But if you want to get the unsigned prospects and the full experience, use the real NHL teams. And some of them have actual throwback jerseys to like the Quebec Nordiques. So you should be able to use those jerseys if you want to have somewhat of an accurate experience. But anyways, let's go through a little bit of this roster build first, and then we'll get obviously into how to set it up for Custom League. I'll probably make some timestamps so you guys can kind of navigate between the certain points if you want to already just go see how to set it up for Custom League. Alright, so let's just skim through a couple of these, like all these created teams that we have. As you can see, we have some AHL teams like the Adirondack Red Wings. I also had to make some IHL teams again for the AHL because some NHL teams didn't have AHL teams. So the Atlanta Knights were actually part of the IHL, but now they're joining the AHL as Tampa Bay's affiliate. We also have the Baltimore Skipjacks, which is Washington. You could tell like Binghamton Rangers are easily the New York Rangers. And you get to like some of the NHL teams like the Boston Bruins, Buffalo Sabres, and whatnot. Like, this is a really, really fun build. Like, I wanted to do this build for a while. Also, I was kind of like requested by Crash Andrews, like, I'd like to say 2 years ago, because basically, I think it was back in NHL 22, near the end of NHL 22, I was actually working on making a 93 roster. Now, this is at the point in time where Custom League didn't exist, so there was like filler teams and all that, and I was actually really close to getting that roster build out for the end of NHL 22, I think it was. And unfortunately, I just could not grind out anymore because I had done like 5 roster builds that year, so I could not get the last of it done, so I never put it out. Then you fast forward a little bit to 22-23, so in NHL 23, I met Crash Andrews actually at a Sens game, and he even told me in person to get to doing 1993 as soon as possible if I could, because 93 is his wheelhouse, and I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually, and this year I decided to finally deliver my promise and create 1992-93 for him, so I know that he's going to have an absolute blast once he gets to using this. A lot of nostalgic teams. You even have like the Salt Lake City Golden Eagles of the IHL, which is Calgary's affiliate. So some really interesting teams in the AHL, and then obviously the NHL teams have some really sick jerseys, unless you decide to use the real NHL teams, which, like I said, I would recommend doing so just because you're going to miss out on unsigned players otherwise, like Peter Forsberg, Sergei Gonchar, Nikolai Hebybulin. Like, there's some pretty big unsigned prospects in this roster build. And if you're wondering why I made Winnipeg's main color white instead of blue, well, it's just because that way if you go in-game and actually watch the Jets play, they will have like actual Winnipeg whiteout, because everybody in the fans will be wearing white as their primary color rather than blue. So it was just more to give them a kind of a cool look, especially in like playoff games. So yeah, that's basically anyways a little rundown of what those teams' jerseys are, well, logos look like, I should say. Let's just go to create a player. Actually, I should go through the roster editing part. This will be a little bit easier to show you guys some of the players in this roster build. It is pretty damn in depth, this roster. There is a lot of players in junior that are draft eligible and also unsigned. So some of these WHL teams, OHL teams have like 12 plus players on them, which is insane. So you could almost like do like a throwback game with a WHL team in a sense, depending if it's a team that has a lot of prospects or not. Some teams have no prospects because they didn't exist, like the Calgary Hitmen have only one player, and it wasn't even a player that played for the Calgary Hitmen. I think he played for some junior Hitmen team, and that's why I put him on that team. So but we'll go to anyways to the custom teams so you guys can see the actual NHL teams and AHL teams that I made. So starting off here, we'll just briefly kind of go through like the top players on each team. We're not going to go through the super in depth because obviously I want you guys to experience this roster for yourself when you go and download the file. But this is the Adirondack Red Wings, so this is the AHL team for Detroit. You got Bobby Dallas leading the way. Guys like Stuart Malgunas, Dennis Vial, Vyacheslav Kozlov, that's a pretty big one to have in a system. And yeah, there's some familiar faces. Darren McCarty as well, Jason York. So pretty nice team. They also do have Chris Osgood in net. I'm not going to skim over to the goalies just because I just don't want this video being like an hour, 2 hours long like I used to make these videos, because it just absolutely kills my voice. But anyways, on to the Atlanta Knights. This is Tampa Bay's AHL affiliate, so led by Jock Callender. You also have like Dave Capuano, Jason Lafreniere, Rick Lands, Alain Cote, Stan Drulia, so some familiar faces from my 99-2000 build, hopefully. Corey Cross. So there is them. They also do have, I should actually show, because this is an important part about the goalies, they do have Manon Rhéaume. So Manon Rhéaume will be in franchise mode. It's up to you if you want to keep on to her. She only has AHL starter potential, which is probably better than she should actually have, but I wanted to make her somewhat usable in franchise mode. So if you want to hold on to Manon Rhéaume, go ahead. I even customized her gear and all that stuff, so she should be somewhat accurate. So here is Manon Rhéaume, and actually I don't think I made her stick. Actually, no, maybe I did make her stick, because I think she might have had an all-black stick. I honestly don't remember. I looked at some images on Google, but yeah, there's that. Also, shout out to David Lipman, who actually used to run the EA NHL franchise for a little bit. Like, I'm pretty sure he was like the... he was what Rammer was beforehand, I think. I honestly don't remember because it was before I was really paying attention to that stuff, but just a shout out to him anyways. Let's head over to the Baltimore Skipjacks. This is Washington's AHL affiliate led by Mark Hunter. You also have like Mike Bobick, John Slaney. Should be able to recognize that guy at least. Jason Woolley's down there. They also have to do like Olaf Kolzig and whatnot. So some pretty good prospects in some of these teams in the AHL. The Binghamton Rangers, obviously New York's AHL team led by Par Juice, former NHL player Christian Juice's dad. So shout out to him. Don Biggs, really good AHL player. Like, this guy had a ton of AHL points that season. I'm pretty certain on that. Also, Robert Burakovsky, so shout out to Andre Burakovsky's dad. Obviously, he didn't play a game for the Rangers or in their AHL team. He was actually an Ottawa Senator. However, he was drafted by the Rangers and was too old to be an unsigned player. So that's why he's in the AHL. Now we finally got an NHL team. The Boston Bruins, led by one Ray Bourque, Adam Oates, Cam Neely, Joe Juneau. Like, you can see this team is pretty damn stacked in terms of high-end talent. Yeah, there's just a lot of good players. I'm not going to skim through everybody, but you get the point pretty much with the Boston Bruins. They also do have some good up-and-comers, though, like Brian Smolinski, a younger Steve Hines. So Boston's in a pretty good spot to start franchise mode. In terms of Buffalo, led by the three guys that are pretty damn insane, Dale Hawerchuk, Pat LaFontaine, and the guy that should be still going into the Hall of Fame that hasn't yet, Alexander McGinley. I have no idea why he's not in the Hall of Fame. He deserves to be there. He's an absolute insane player. You also have like Doug Bodger, players like that. We head on over to the Calgary Flames, led by Al McInnes, of course, with the heavy slap shot. You also have like Theo Fleury, Gary Roberts, Joe Nieuwendyk. Obviously, the Jerome McGinley trade hadn't happened yet at this point in time, because Jerome McGinley is eligible to be drafted in 1995, which is pretty cool. So there's that. We head to the Cape Breton Oilers, who were a fantastic team. I mean, like, they won the Calder Cup, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, who was it? Yeah, it was this McDougall guy. This guy had like 40-something points in the playoffs, and that was like an AHL record or something like that. I don't know if it still is, but he was absolutely cracked in the playoffs in the AHL. You guys could go look him up and you can find out. But yeah, this team anyways, led by like Kirk Maltby and such. So some good prospects down there for the Edmonton Oilers to potentially build around. The Capital City Islanders, which is actually the Capital District Islanders. This is led by guys like Jeff Finley. Not really too much in the AHL going for the New York Islanders, because obviously the Islanders were really good in the 80s, so they shouldn't have the best prospect pool in the world, but they have some decent players, some good physical grit too, like with Dean Chenoweth, guys like these grinders like Marois and Parks. Like, they definitely have a bit of grit to their AHL team. The Chicago Blackhawks, led by Jeremy Roenick, new Hall of Famer. Shout out to him. Chris Chelios as well. Steve Larmer. Some good faces there in Chicago. Obviously, they went to the 92 Cup Finals, only to lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think it was. Was it a 92? Yeah, it was a 92. I just had to double check in my brain, because at first I was like, wait a sec. Anyways, Cleveland Lumberjacks. This is the Pittsburgh Penguins IHL affiliate, which is now in the AHL for this build, led by one Brian Fogarty. Rest in peace to Fogarty. We also have like Perry Ganchar, Paul Laus, who was actually drafted by the Penguins. I didn't realize that until somewhat recently. And then obviously he was picked up in the expansion draft a year later by the Florida Panthers. So some good faces down there. The Connecticut Senators, which is actually the New Haven Senators. For some reason, New Haven isn't a play-by-play or a team country or city name. Goddamn, I can't talk. A city name in this game, so that's why Connecticut is there. They're led by like Jeff Lazaro. I made Alexei Yashin playing in the AHL. Technically, he was still overseas in Russia as an unsigned prospect, but I still put him down there anyways, just because might as well get him into the AHL as fast as possible for the Sens, because obviously that Sens team, when we get to it, is pretty damn bad. You have the Detroit Red Wings led by Yzerman, Coffey, and a bunch of other really good talents. A lot of Hall of Famers and a lot of good face punchers like Bob Probert too. So some good players there. The Edmonton Oilers weren't really in a good stat at this point. Obviously, they had won a lot of cups in the 80s as well. They also won in 1990. However, afterwards, obviously, you lost Messier, you lost Gretzky. So, yeah, this team's not really much the same anymore. They tried to build around like guys like Doug Weight in this era. Pretty much that's how it worked. Craig Simpson was still there, so shout out to Craig Simpson. And yeah, it's not as good of a team as it was at one point. So you'll obviously have to kind of rebuild with the Oilers, probably in franchise mode likely. For the Fredericton Canadiens, obviously Montreal's AHL team, a lot of these guys were actually unsigned, but they were too old to be unsigned, so I had to throw them into the AHL, some of them. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe not a lot of them were, but there was a couple of them in this roster that were, like, I think Shellberg might have, actually maybe it wasn't Shellberg. I think it was like Yves Saroux and stuff, but a lot of these guys actually went on to play in the NHL, so Montreal actually has a pretty good AHL team for being competitive, obviously with like Donald Brashear being down there, which is kind of neat. So shout out to the Fredericton Canadiens. The Halifax Citadels, which is Quebec's AHL team, led by Alexander Karpovtsev, who was technically actually an unsigned prospect of the Nordiques and then went on to sign with the Rangers, or get dealt to the Rangers, I think it was maybe. Yeah. They have some NHL talent down there as well. We head to the Hamilton Canucks, obviously Vancouver's AHL team. A lot of the AHL teams have the exact same name as their NHL team, which is kind of funny. And then there's Rick Vive down there, Dan Kessa. So some familiar faces. Tim the Toolman Taylor was in the AHL for the Canucks. He was actually dealt from Washington to Vancouver, and obviously didn't play really in the NHL until he was with Detroit and all that. So it's kind of interesting. We have the Hartford Whalers, which obviously in franchise mode, you'll have to use the Carolina Hurricanes, led by like Pat Verbeek, Jeff Sanderson, Andrew Castles, those type of guys. So shout out to them. We go to the Hershey Bears. This is Philadelphia's AHL affiliate, so no, it's not Washington's, because obviously Washington's is Baltimore, but led by Wes Walz, Tim Tukey, not Toogie. But I did put Toogie as a play-by-play for Tim Tukey, which is kind of funny. So there's that. The Indianapolis Ice, which is Chicago's IHL affiliate, led by Tony Herkic. Some familiar faces down there, potentially. The Kalamazoo Wings, which is Minnesota's AHL team, or IHL team technically. Technically, the Dallas Stars weren't a team until 1993-94, so technically this is the last year of the North Stars, which is interesting. Some familiar faces maybe down here as well that eventually went on to play for the Dallas Stars. The Kansas City Blades, which is the AHL team or IHL team actually I should say again, for the San Jose Sharks, led by Igor Larionov, who is actually overseas in Switzerland, but he had his rights dealt from the Vancouver Canucks to San Jose this season. So that's the reason why I put him in the AHL for them, is just because obviously he wasn't on the NHL team. And at least that way he has rights. Because obviously being a 31-year-old, you can't make him an unsigned prospect. Also got Ray Whitney. So some good potential with Ray Whitney at least. But a lot of not so good players. Claudio Scremin, one of the best names of all time. I'd like to say Screamin', but he's not screaming. Also guys like Link Gates. So some interesting players down there. We head to the Los Angeles Kings, who obviously lost in the Cup Finals to the Montreal Canadiens, led by Gretzky, Robitaille. Like you could see, this team definitely had the skill level to go on to that Stanley Cup Finals, but unfortunately they just could not get it done. And then we head to the North Stars, led by Mike Modano at 22 years old, Russ Courtnall, some good faces there. The Moncton Hawks, which is Winnipeg's AHL team, led by Andy Brickley and Chris Draper, which is interesting. So Chris Draper over there, obviously in real life, he was traded for $1 to Detroit, and in Detroit, obviously utilized him super well and became one of the best bottom six forwards to win a bunch of Stanley Cups, probably. So shout out to him. So there is Moncton. We also do have the All-Star teams in this, which obviously you can see this is the Campbell Conference All-Stars, led by Gretzky and Yzerman. And then if you go over to the Wales side, you could say led by Ray Bourque, Alex McGinley, Pierre Turgeon. So if you want to play the All-Star game, you can, which is very exciting. The Montreal Canadiens, obviously the team that went on to win the Stanley Cup, led by a lot of really good talent. For some reason, when I was doing some test sims, I only simulated 3 seasons of this with my build. So if you run into any issues, let me know, because I've only not simulated too much. But Mike Keane jumped up to like an 88 somehow. I don't know if he had just had a really good statistical season, but some players could just randomly jump up. And also shout out to Stéphane Lebeau. This guy's an 84 overall because he had a really good season, and then he kind of fell out of nowhere. Like in the next few years, he'd probably be like a 79 overall in a roster build. But this season, he was actually really good, I think it was, or the season before this, if I remember right. The New Jersey Devils, led by Scott Stevens. Also, you have like Claude Lemieux. Like, you can see why this Devils team obviously went on to win the Stanley Cup in '95. You also have a young Scott Niedermayer. You have Bernie Nichols there, Bobby Holik. Like, there's some good players to build around for sure on this Devils team. They also do have a young Martin Brodeur in the AHL, which is interesting. The New York Islanders, led by Pierre Turgeon and a bunch of other players. Not the best Islanders team in the world, but obviously they were falling off a bit since their cup winning days. So there's that. The New York Rangers obviously winning the Stanley Cup a year after this, led by Mark Messier, Brian Leetch. Like, you could definitely see why this team was a few pieces away from winning a Stanley Cup. Also, what's interesting is they still have Tony Amonte in this, because obviously Tony Amonte in real life was dealt to Chicago in 1994, and that's what got them Stéphane Matteau. And obviously, Stéphane Matteau played a big factor in winning that Stanley Cup for the Rangers. The Ottawa Senators, this is a very bad team. One of the worst teams I've ever seen on paper, led by Bob Kudelski, who had a 40-goal season at one point. You also have like Norm McIver, Sylvain Turgeon. But after that, you can kind of see why his team didn't do so well. Like, the further down you go, the more depth kind of players you have on this roster. So yeah, it's not very good. And then in between the pipes, you had also like Sidorkowicz, who's only like a 77, also had a very terrible goal save above expected. So very bad Sens team. The Peoria Rivermen, which is St. Louis's AHL team, or IHL team actually at this point, led by Brett Hedican. Also Lee Norwood. Shout out to Lee Norwood. Some Russian guys as well. There you go. Philadelphia, obviously led by Mark Recchi, Rod Brindamore, a 19-year-old Eric Lindros, which is insane. He's already getting paid a lot of money too, because of the fact that's what he was paid once he was dealt, I think, from the Nordiques over to Philadelphia. It'll be interesting at some point if I do ever a 1992 roster build and decide to make Eric Lindros have rights to Quebec or something like that, because that could be interesting to see what ends up happening with that, or making the year that Eric Lindros is the top pick, something like that. Gary Galley's there, etc. We head to the Phoenix Roadrunners, which is LA's IHL affiliate, led by Robert Lang. You also do have some former NHL players' fathers, which is kind of cool on this team. Scott Bukestad, the father of Nick Bukestad, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe the uncle, something like that. Definitely a relative of Nick Bukestad, that's all I can remember. But you do have Jeff Chikrin, so Jacob Chikrin's dad, which is kind of cool. You also have Ed Kastelic, who is Mark Kastelic's dad. Mark Kastelic now with the Boston Bruins. And then I think there was also... Actually, wait, it's on the NHL team for LA. But if I'm not mistaken... Oh, wait, no, actually, he is here. Brent Thompson's here, too. Yeah, Brent Thompson is Tage and Tice Thompson's father. So the Phoenix Roadrunners have a lot of future NHL players' fathers on it, which is kind of cool. So shout out to them. We head to the Pittsburgh Penguins, obviously coming off back-to-back Stanley Cup wins in 91 and 92, led by Mario Lemieux. This team is absolutely filthy. Like Tocchet, Francis, Murphy, like they have a lot of high-end talent. Like Jaromir Jagr is going to probably break a ton of records in franchise mode for you, just because of the fact he's only 20 years old at this point. Yeah, very filthy team in Pittsburgh. The Providence Bruins, so obviously Boston's AHL team, led by Tim Sweeney, a young Glenn Murray who's only 19 years old, and a bunch of other players. Also Joseph Stumple. Shout out to Stumple. Quebec, led by Joe Sakic, Matt Sundin. So Quebec has a very good starting base as well. Technically, in this, obviously, you don't have to. You would be Colorado, which kind of sucks, but you would definitely have a very good team in front of you. You also would have an unsigned Peter Forsberg, so you technically could easily build this team into being a multi-cup winner, more than likely. So there is the Nordiques. The Rochester Americans, which is Buffalo's AHL team. Led by the likes of Bill Holder, Derek Plon, Keith Carney's down there, which is kind of cool. Pretty much that's it. Then we head on over to the Salt Lake City Golden Eagles, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the Calgary Flames IHL affiliate, led by guys like Greg Smith, Paul Kruse. Like, there's not really too much good faces down here. Sandy McCarthy, like, you got some grit for the bottom six, but they don't really have too much prospects. Robert Schwela was actually an unsigned prospect of the Flames. He was then dealt the year after this to the Florida Panthers, so he's a bit too old, so obviously I had to put him in the AHL. San Jose, obviously another really bad team in this franchise mode type of roster. So you have Ottawa and San Jose, both historically terrible at this point in time, led by Kelly Kissio, Johan Garpenlov, some coaches like Dean Evison, former general manager like Doug Wilson, and then also another former coach like Mike Sullivan, our current head coach like Mike Sullivan. I don't think he got fired, right? Not yet, at least. But there is the Sharks, and yeah, they're pretty bad as well. So if you want a nice rebuilder in franchise mode, San Jose is a good team for you. Ottawa's a good team for you, and probably Hartford, Edmonton, those type of teams maybe. The Springfield Indians, which is the AHL team for the Hartford Whalers, led by Mike Tomlick, Paul Sear, Mark Gregg. So shout out to Ridley Gregg's dad, and shout out to Kira Gregg for liking one of my tweets one of the times. That's Ridley's older sister. Also, shout out to Leonid Toropchenko. This is the Alexei Toropchenko on the St. Louis Blues father, which is interesting. I didn't realize he played, but he was an AHLer for a little bit, so that's pretty cool. Also, shout out to Martin Hammerlick, which I believe is Roman Hammerlick's brother, so that's neat too. The St. John's Maple Leafs. I almost said St. Louis for no reason, but anyways, Mike Eastwood leading the way. This AHL team's actually pretty good on paper. Like, a lot of guys end up making the NHL at some point, even in a bottom six type of role. Like, you definitely have some good talent, like Yannick Perreault. So, if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, you might actually have some players to build around from your AHL, which is kind of nice. We also head to the St. Louis Blues, led by Brett Hull, who was an insane goal scorer at this point in time. So that's why his shooting is straight 99s, because he did score like his 80-something goal season or whatever the heck it was at this, like a year before this or 2 years before this. Yeah, he was a cracked goal scorer at this point. Also, Brendan Shanahan, Craig Janey, one of the more underrated top lines back in the day. Jeff Brown's up there, so Logan Brown's father. You also have Ron and Rich Sutter, so which is neat. Both of them are twins, so that's cool. The Tampa Bay Lightning, another good rebuilding team for franchise mode, but a little bit better than teams like Ottawa and San Jose, led by Brian Bradley. And yeah, pretty much that's that. The Toronto Maple Leafs, led by Doug Gilmour, Dave Vanderchuk. Some good talent there in Toronto. They actually also went all the way to the conference finals this year to lose to the LA Kings because they were in the Western Conference at this point in time. Same with the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is kind of weird that Tampa would be in the Western Conference, but that's how the NHL started off with them, which is kind of weird. The Utica Devils, as I said, Martin Brodeur is in the AHL for this team. This is New Jersey's AHL affiliate. A lot of guys end up wanting to go play in the NHL, though. Like, you have, like, Jim Dowd, Yaroslav Modry. You also have like Kevin Dean. So there is some guys that actually went on to play in the NHL. Chris McAlpine, that type of thing. But also shout out to Martin Brodeur, Corey Schwab. Mike Dunham was technically unsigned, but I had to make him still for the AHL team. So there is Utica. We then head on over to the Vancouver Canucks, who obviously went to the Cup Finals the year after this, led by a young Pavel Bure. And speaking of Pavel Bure, when I did my test runs, He became an RFA, and Boston actually sent him an offer sheet, and they actually won the offer sheet. They gave up 4 first-round picks to the Vancouver Canucks to sign him, which was pretty insane. I don't know if that's going to happen for you when you play through this on franchise mode, but it's absolutely insane when something like that happens. So I'm hoping that it happens for some of you guys as well, because yeah, Pavel Bure switching teams early in his career is very unique. Obviously, he's very good for Vancouver, but I guess Vancouver decided that they didn't really want him, and in Boston ended up taking him. And it was a great addition to put next to somebody like Adam Oates. So it was a little bit of an interesting thing to see for this roster build. We also head on over to the Washington Capitals, led by Kevin Hatcher, Mike Ridley, Dale Hunter. So some solid players here. Peter Bondra. When we head to the last team of this roster, the Winnipeg Jets. And I hate that still for some reason, though, when you use white as a team color, though. Why does it not change the color of, like, the silhouette, for instance, though, to black? And why doesn't it change the, like, font color to black as well? That's the one thing I was debating about not having their team color be white, but for whatever reason, it doesn't do that. But anyways, Timo Solani leading the way. Obviously, a fantastic rookie season for him. The best in NHL history. You also have, like, Phil Housley, Thomas Steen, which is Alex Steen's father, Frederick Olson, Keith Tkachuk is there, obviously Brady and Matthews' dad, Alexei Zhamnov. So some interesting players there for the Winnipeg Jets. So there is a little run through of the rosters. It took already like 27 minutes plus for me to go through that pretty much. Okay, so welcome to the setup portion of the franchise mode thing for custom leagues. So you're going to want 24 teams. Obviously, there's 24 teams in the league at this point in time. It's actually going to put the 24 teams that played at this point already in the NHL and AHL. So if you put it at 24, which is great. So don't worry about it. It's set up actually pretty accurately with that. In terms of this, you also want to have 2 conferences because you want to have the Campbell and you want to have the Wales conference. And then you also want to have 4 divisions. And obviously you should turn off the salary cap, but there is a little bit of a weird thing. For some reason, I think when you turn the salary cap off, it makes all the contracts I gave, a lot of them 2-way contracts, because a lot of players back in these days made $550K or less money. So I basically give them the minimum. And for some reason, when you turn the salary cap off, it thinks every $550,000 contract almost is a 2-way contract. So I think that's an issue. I'm not 100% sure with that, but oh well, doesn't really matter too much. In terms of the schedule, there was 84 games in this season, which is kind of weird because obviously we're used to 82, but there was 84 in the season. 36 division games, which leaves 24 for the conference and 24 for interconference. So make sure you have it set up like that if you want it more accurate. In terms of the standings format, there is single overtime 5-on-5, and there is no loser points. So if you lose in overtime, you still get no points. So make sure you have it set up like that. It kind of sucks because that way, the only way you can get points is if you win or if you tie. In terms of playoff qualification, this is a little bit of an interesting one. It's set up like divisions, so divisional. And basically, each division has 4 teams that make the playoffs with no wild cards set up as well. I didn't actually know about this until I was watching Tugi's stream last night, and Tugi and even Crash was mentioning, I think, in the chat or something about this being set up like this. So just a heads up if you actually want to set it up to be like that. Obviously, it makes it a little bit more accurate to the time period. In terms of playoff format, it's the exact same as today's day and age, so don't worry about changing anything here unless you really want to. And then the AHL is basically also set up like so. So you have 2 conferences, 4 divisions, because I did kind of make it a little bit of a hybrid division setup with the IHL and AHL. And you guys will see how to set that up in a little bit. In terms of the AHL schedule, there was 80 games in the AHL, but I don't really know how much division games, how much conference games, interconference games they had. So if you know actually the specifics to this, please let me know in the comments because I would love to know the actual thing for this point in time. But I'm not an AHL historian, so I honestly don't know anything more than how many games they played at that point. So that would be nice. And yeah, basically you can play with this however way you want it if you don't know either. In terms of the standings formats, it's the same as the NHL. So once again, no loser point. There will be ties. It kind of sucks, but that's the way the NHL was run at that point. And once again, also, I decided to do it as a divisional setup for the playoffs where there is 4 teams that qualify from each division. And that's the same as well. So that's basically the setup. Next, you guys will see basically how to actually like substitute in all the teams and get the divisions set up so they're accurate to the time period. Okay, so this is the substitution portion of this. So I would recommend substituting in only the AHL like I was mentioning before. If you substituted my created NHL teams, you will lose the unsigned prospects. But anyways, you should have the affiliations looking like the following. Let me remove my face so you guys can get a full experience. So the Arizona Coyotes or the Winnipeg Jets should have the Moncton Hawks as their AHL team. Obviously, the Providence Bruins should be affiliated to the Boston Bruins, Rochester Americans to the Buffalo Sabres. The Salt Lake City Golden Eagles should be Calgary's AHL team. Springfield Indians should be Carolina's / Hartford's, but obviously use Carolina if you want the unsigned prospects again. The Indianapolis Ice should be Chicago's. Halifax Hittles belong to Colorado / Quebec. The Dallas Stars / Minnesota North Stars should have the Kalamazoo Wings. Adirondack Red Wings, obviously the Detroit Red Wings. Cape Breton Oilers, the Edmonton Oilers. Phoenix Roadrunners, the Los Angeles Kings. Fredericton Canadiens, the Montreal Canadiens. New Jersey should have the Utica Devils. The Islanders should have the Capital City Islanders. The New York Rangers should have the Binghamton Rangers. Ottawa Senators should have the Connecticut Senators. Philadelphia should have Hershey Bears. The Pittsburgh Penguins, the Cleveland Lumberjacks. San Jose, the Kansas City Blades. St. Louis should have Peoria. The Tampa Bay Lightning should have the Atlanta Knights. Toronto should have the St. John's Maple Leafs. Vancouver, the Hamilton Canucks. Washington, the Baltimore Skipjacks. So make sure you have it set up like that in terms of teams substituted in for AHL. It should be pretty easy. Basically, when you're in the division realignment stage is when you can substitute in created teams. Do not sub in any NHL created teams, but substitute in the AHL ones. Now, in terms of division realignment, let's get into how this should actually be set up. So I'm going to start with the AHL because the NHL, you can literally just find what the NHL divisions look like if you end up going to Hockey Reference, which I would recommend. But let's go to the AHL so you guys can see what I want the AHL set up like. So you have 4 divisions in the AHL, 2 conferences. So the best way to set this up is if this is the Pacific Division, this is the Midwest Division, this is the Central Division, and this is the Atlantic Division. So in the Pacific Division, you want to have the Peoria Rivermen, which, where is Peoria? Oh, there they are, okay. So you want to have Peoria, and then you also want to have Kansas City and Phoenix, so let's get those added to there as well. So Kansas City, where is Kansas City? There they are. So these guys, a lot of these teams are IHL teams, but I'm putting them in the same division. But they also kind of make sense too, based on what the IHL was built up like in the AHL. You also want Kalamazoo being over there. You also want the Salt Lake City Golden Eagles. And you want, finally, the Indianapolis Ice. So this Pacific Division is pretty much all IHL teams. Or actually, it is all IHL teams at the moment. So that will be the Pacific Division. Then the Midwest Division, you're going to want the Utica Devils. So move on over to Utica. You're also going to want the Binghamton Rangers. So the Binghamton Rangers are already in there, which is good. You also want to have the Rochester Americans. On top of that, you want Baltimore. So let's get the Baltimore Skipjacks over. You also do want those Hershey Bears to stay there. And you also want the Hamilton Canucks. So that will be the Midwest Division. Then you want the Central Division to have a couple teams as well, like the Cleveland Lumberjacks. They should be there. The Connecticut Senators, or the New Haven Senators, I should say, will be there as well. You also have the Springfield Indians. You'll have the Capital District Islanders, so the Capital City Islanders basically in this. The Adirondack Red Wings will also be there. And the Providence Bruins, which will give you an Eastern Conference, well, Atlantic Division, I should say, actually, with the Atlanta Knights, the St. John's Maple Leafs, Halifax Citadels, Fredericton Canadiens, Moncton Hawks, and the Cape Breton Oilers. So that makes it a little bit more accurate to what it should be like, because you have a bunch of teams that are in the Maritimes and also Atlanta. You have all these teams that are kind of more closer in location. You have a bunch of teams that are in like the New York area. Some of them are a little bit further than New York area. And then you also have this division with a bunch of IHL teams pretty much. And all of those are pretty much, I think, closer to the West, which makes sense. So basically name them like that. And then each conference, you could just name it like Eastern and Western Conference. This would be the Western Conference. This would be the Eastern Conference. And like that. terms of the NHL and their divisions, I'll show you guys this, even though you could technically, like I said, find this on Hockey Reference. Technically, we would have the Norris division in the Western Conference, which would be Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, the St. Louis Blues will also be over there. The Tampa Bay Lightning will be over there, which is kind of a weird one. And then you'll also have the Minnesota North Stars, so the Dallas Stars will get moved over to there. So that is the Norris division as part of the Campbell Conference, because there wasn't Eastern Western, it was Campbell and Wales. So this is the Campbell Conference and Norris division. In terms of the Smythe division, you want to have the Vancouver Canucks, who are already over there, which is good. You want the LA Kings as well, the Calgary Flames, the Edmonton Oilers, the Winnipeg Jets, so you want to move Arizona over there just because of that. And then you would also want to move over the San Jose Sharks. So basically the Western Conference should look something like that. In terms of Western Conference, I should say the Campbell Conference again, just for clarification. The Wales Conference, so starting off with the Adams division, this should have the Buffalo Sabres, the Boston Bruins, the Colorado Avalanche, because they're the Quebec Nordiques still at this point in time, the Carolina Hurricanes, because they're technically Hartford at this point in time, the Ottawa Senators, and then it also should have the, what's the last team here? Montreal Canadiens as well. So that is the Adams division. And then finally, this is the Patrick division, which is kind of like the Metropolitan division at this point. So you have Philadelphia, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, and the two New York teams, and the Washington Capitals. So that's basically what the divisions should look like in both the NHL and AHL once you have it set up properly. Obviously rename the divisions, but I'm not going to do that just because this episode will be, or video will be way too long if I go through every single point. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this 1993 roster overview. I hope you guys liked it. Obviously, this roster took a lot of work, just like my 1999-2000 build. I will not be doing another roster build this year for NHL 24. Already getting my plans set up for NHL 25, because these builds take a lot longer than they used to with the amount of players I can make now. So I hope you guys understand, and hopefully NHL 25 is going to be a fun year for roster builds as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.